Chapter 4. The Preparation of Israel. And so it will be in the end of the world, even when gods disappear from the earth, they will fall down before idols just the same. Fyodor Dostoevsky. One of the great ironies of the Old Testament is that an entire nation was enslaved as a result of one of its children being sold into slavery. The story of Joseph, Genesis chapter 30 to 50, is an astonishing revelation of the way God works in human hearts and in sacred history. In addition, it offers important insights about the end times. Joseph, the beloved son of his father Jacob, was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Joseph was taken to Egypt, where his diligence and loyalty were in time rewarded. He was appointed governor over the land, and because of his careful storing of grain during 7 years of plenty, he could disperse these reserves to the people during the following 7 years of drought. Joseph's brothers came to Egypt during the drought to buy grain. He tested them to see if they had repented of their evil against him. When he saw that they had, Joseph was reconciled to his brothers, and the entire household of Jacob relocated to Egypt. In time, the Israelites became a great multitude and were enslaved by the Egyptians. God then sent Moses to challenge Pharaoh with miraculous signs, plagues, and finally destruction. God thus freed his people from slavery and led them to the promised land through the Red Sea. When Pharaoh tried to follow, the walls of the sea, which had been held back allowing Israel to walk on dry land, suddenly crashed down, destroying his army. Lactantius considered the story of Joseph to be a metaphor for the last days. Although he does not mention it, the 7 years of drought may symbolize the 7 years of Antichrist's reign. Quote, though so famous and wonderful a deed shows God's power to men in the present, it was also the pre-signification and figure of something greater that God is to do in the final consummation of the ages. He will free his people from the slavery of the world. Then, because there was one people of God who dwelt in the midst of one nation, Egypt alone was struck. Now, because the people of God are gathered from all languages and dwell among all nations and are opposed by their rule, all nations, that is, the whole world, must be struck by divine blows so that God's just and devout people may be freed. Just as then signs were given that showed the coming slaughter to the Egyptians, so at the end there will be fearful prodigies in all the world's elements, which all nations will grasp the imminent destruction. End quote. In a sense, Israel represents the wall upon which God's, quote, handwriting, end quote, appears. Daniel 5. The world has come to know its Creator largely because of the Jews. Whether this ancient, quote, chosen, end quote, people obeyed the Lord or defied him, they have nevertheless served as examples and warnings to all mankind. Their history is a guidebook to what should, shouldn't, and will yet be done. The Lenten Triodion contains the following prayer. Quote, O Lord, the Jews condemn thee to death, who art the life of all. With Moses' rod thou hast led them on dry ground through the Red Sea, yet they nailed thee to the cross. See how the lawless synagogue has condemned to death the King of the creation. They were not ashamed when he recalled his blessing, saying, quote, O my people, what have I done unto you? Have I not filled Judea with miracles? Have I not raised the dead by my word alone? Have I not healed every sickness and disease? How then have ye repaid me? Why have ye forgotten me? In return for healing ye have given me blows. In return for life ye are putting me to death. Ye hang upon the cross your benefactor as an evildoer, your lawgiver as a transgressor of the law, the king of all as one condemned. End quote. In failing to recognize their Messiah, the Jews confirmed their blindness. In crucifying him, they assured their destruction. Israel condemned the temple of God, Christ's body, and in consequence, God condemned the temple of Israel. This is exactly what Jesus told his disciples would happen before either event took place. Quote, and his disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple, and Jesus said to them, quote, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. End quote. Matthew chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. Having led their own king to death on the cross, the Jews shunned their protector, and they would consequently be taken captive, dispersed, and killed. Quote, "For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled." End quote. Luke 21, verses 22 and 24. Obedient, though unknowingly, to God's will, the Roman Emperor Titus destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, slaughtering thousands of Jews and sending the rest into exile. Herod's magnificent temple, completed just years earlier, was decimated. As Jesus foretold, there was literally not one stone left upon another. The destruction was so complete that even sophisticated, high-tech archaeologists admit the exact location of the temple on the Temple Mount is now uncertain. The destruction of the holy city was a foreimage of the ultimate fate which awaits the world in consequence of its rejection of Christ. We read in Apostasy and Antichrist, quote, "The fall of Jerusalem was symbolic of the end of the world, but terrible though it was only a pale shadow of what is to come upon mankind at the very end." End quote. For nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish people had no permanent home as the diaspora spread throughout the world. God had revealed, however, that Israel's punishment would eventually have an end, and the Jews would be drawn back to the Promised Land. Quote, "After many days you will be visited," end quote, wrote Ezekiel. Quote, "In the latter days you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell in safety." End quote. Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 8. Returning home. In 1948, the tiny state of Israel was reborn in spite of overwhelming, yet understandable, Arab hostilities, thus fulfilling God's prophecy to restore the Jewish homeland. The ending of Jacob's captivity meant that God's other prophecies could be fulfilled, the regathering of, quote, "the whole house of Israel," end quote. Quote, "Thus says the Lord God, quote, now I will bring back the captives of Jacob and have mercy on the whole house of Israel, and I will be jealous for my holy name. When I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I am hallowed in them in the sight of many nations." End quote. Ezekiel 39, 25, and 27. Jeremiah refers to, quote, "the north country," end quote, which could well mean Russia and Eastern Europe, whence many Ashkenazim Jews have come back to Israel. Quote, "Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the ends of the earth, among them the blind and the lame, the woman with child and the one who labors with child together. A great throng shall return there." End quote. Jeremiah 31, verse 8. "The Lord spread them out on the earth, and the Lord will call them to return," said Zechariah. Quote, "Up, up, flee from the land of the north, says the Lord. Quote, for I have spread you abroad like the four winds of heaven," end quote, says the Lord. End quote. Zechariah chapter 2, 6. According to the scriptures, the flight from the north is as significant an event as Israel's deliverance from Egypt's bondage under Moses' leadership. The similarity is obvious, for in both cases the Jews were led to the Promised Land. Quote, "Therefore, behold, the days are coming," end quote, says the Lord, quote, "that it shall be no more said, quote, the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands where he had driven them," end quote, "for I will bring them back into their land which I gave to their fathers," end quote. Jeremiah chapter 16, verses 14 and 15. Ezekiel also confirmed this prophecy, showing that the return of the Jews to their homeland was to be a clearly defined event orchestrated by God. Quote, "Thus says the Lord God, quote, surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land," end quote. Ezekiel 37, verse 21. The last Jewish people. The prophets of old knew that the return of the children of Israel to the Promised Land would spark a deep religious revival. Quote, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days." End quote. Hosea chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. Even though the temple had been destroyed, God's promise through Ezekiel remained to, quote, "set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their God, and they shall be my people," end quote. Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 26 and 27. Micah made it clear when God's temple would be reestablished. Quote, quote, "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow to it." End quote. Micah 4, verse 1. The temple will be again restored, quote, "in the latter days." End quote. Amos also timed this historic event with his phrase, quote, "on that day," end quote, indicating the day of the Lord or Christ's return. The ruins are to be raised up and the temple built again, quote, "as in the days of old," end quote. Quote, "On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages. I will raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old," end quote. Amos chapter 9, verse 11. In 1981, Father Seraphim Rose gave a lecture at the University of California at Santa Cruz in which he said, quote, "Another sign that the times of the end are approaching is the present state of the Jews in Israel in the city of Jerusalem. According to the prophecies of the Scriptures and the Holy Fathers, Jerusalem will be the world capital of Antichrist, and there he will rebuild the Temple of Solomon, where he will be worshipped as God. Of course, it is very significant that only since 1948 has Jerusalem been once more in the hands of the Jews, and only since 1967 has the place where the temple was, in the Mosque of Omar, been in their hands, since this had been in the part held by the Muslims. If you were to ask anyone who's aware at all of political events in the world at question, quote, what would be the ideal city to have as the world capital if there was going to be a world empire, end quote, it's obvious what the answer would be in most people's minds. It can't be New York because that's the capital of capitalism. It can't be Moscow because that's the center of communism. It can't even be Rome because Roman Catholicism is still some kind of limited division. The logical place is Jerusalem because there 3 religions come together, 3 continents come together. It's the most logical place where there can be peace, brotherhood, harmony, all those things which look good, but unless they have a solid Christian foundation, are not God-pleasing. These things will be used by Antichrist." End quote. Significant preparations are presently underway in Israel to restore the actual worship ceremonies formerly conducted within Solomon's temple. Sacred vessels have been formed, priestly garments sewn. As Ice and Price report in their 1992 book, Ready to Rebuild, quote, "The Temple Institute, then, is preparing vessels and garments for the temple service and seeking to produce a valid red heifer in Israel for the future purification of the priests and worshippers in the temple. The leaders of this organization firmly believe that we are in the Akari ha-Yamin, quote, last days, end quote, which include the coming of the Messiah. They expect the building of the temple to begin shortly," end quote. The Messiah whom the Jews anticipate, however, bears little resemblance to the Jesus Christ who voluntarily died to save sinners. They look for a world leader to rule all the nations from his capital of Jerusalem, to initiate a political regime of, quote, "peace," end quote, and, quote, "prosperity," end quote, and to vindicate Israel for her centuries of suffering at Gentile hands. Quote, "They do not want Christ as he is, end quote. Christ's contemporary writer, Alexander Kalamiros. Quote, "They do not want the Christ who refused to submit to the devil's temptations in the desert. They want a Christ who desires the kingdoms of the earth, a Christ who will turn the stones into bread so that men may be satiated, a Christ who will overwhelm the world with miracles that inspire awe and constrain men to submit, a Christ who will talk about this life and not the other, a Christ who will offer the pleasures of this life and not the next. They do not want him as ruler of the future age, but of the present one," end quote. In a word, after 2 centuries of incredible suffering for their blindness, the Jews as a whole have not changed. Myopically, they still want what they wanted 2,000 years ago, and this time they will get it.